This is a fan-generated show. If you would like to support us, please go to jamieglazov.com, and also don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. All your support is greatly appreciated.
Hello, and welcome to another Daniel Greenfield moment on, as always, the Glazov Gang. I hope all of you have survived the cold spell well enough. Around the time of the worst of it, I was in Chicago where the real field temperature was minus 15. And meanwhile, of course, we were being told about the dangers of global warming. Because when you can't take your hands out of your gloves for 5 seconds without losing all the feeling in your fingers, that's the perfect time to tell you that yes, the world is ending in fire, not in ice. But that's how the left operates, and it's this cognitive dissonance, this disjunction between reality and the left's ideology that's going to be the topic of our talk today. Another way of putting that, of course, is crazy. We're not supposed to use the word crazy anymore. It's a politically incorrect term, except, of course, when you're discussing President Trump. And so if you've been paying attention to some of the day-to-day drama in Washington, D.C., a psychologist representing a whole bunch of other psychologists, or rather psychiatrists, came out to Washington, D.C., came out, did a major tour of all the media networks to discuss her belief that President Trump is probably mentally ill in some sort of possible way, and that he really needs to be removed from office using the 25th Amendment as soon as possible. Now, there are a couple of problems with this. One, the shrink in question actually does not currently have a license. Her specialty is prison reform, which means that she's about as qualified to talk about President Trump's mental health as I am to talk about her mental health. But since I'm not a psychiatrist and not bound by any ethics, I have no problem discussing her mental health. Towing along with her were a bunch of others who had put together a book with 27 mental health experts who were going to discuss why President Trump was dangerous. Now, some of these mental health experts may have been mental, but they're not experts in mental health in any possible shape, way, or form. One of them was Trump's co-author on The Art of the Deal. Another is Noam Chomsky. Now, whatever your opinion of those people are, the one thing we should be able to agree upon is that they are not mental health experts. Maybe they're experts on their own mental health, but not those of anybody else. Now, the other varying psychiatrists and psychologists and mental health experts in the book all insisted that Trump was probably crazy, but they all had different diagnoses. There were 4 or 5 of those diagnoses, so they could all agree that Trump was crazy. They couldn't agree what makes him crazy. That's the insanity we're dealing with here. Now, of course, by now, the story has moved on. The caravan is moving over to the latest outrage over Trump, and that is how the left lives these days. I wake up every morning and the news cycle is driven by what are we outraged at today? And the thing that's been outraging them for a while now, most of the time, is President Trump. And they really can't even be bothered to pay attention to any other news stories. Obviously, they're sympathetic to Iran's regime, but even if they weren't, they just don't even have the attention span to take in the latest Trump tweet that they're supposed to be outraged about and actual people fighting and dying for their freedom. Because really, who cares about that sort of thing? American life expectancy has fallen. Black unemployment is now at its lowest level. The stock market is doing what it's doing. But they can't really discuss any of that. What they'd like to discuss is the latest Trump tweet and what it says about him and how we should remove him from office as soon as possible. But the topic is indeed craziness. And craziness is this disjunction between reality and between what you want to be true. Now, the biggest craziness is very much circulating around Trump. It's the varying conspiracy theories that the left has circulated, that the media has mainstreamed about Trump. Many of those conspiracy theories center around Russia. Other conspiracy theories center about anything, including various countries funneling money to Trump, the role of fake news in the election, the role of the FBI in the election. There are varying conspiracy theories. All these conspiracy theories, of course, have one thing in common. There's one solid principle that they're all grounded on. Trump needs to be removed from office as soon as possible. Now, the thing about conspiracy theories is that by their very nature, they tell us more about the person who believes in them than about reality. They're ink blots. When you look at them, you see what you see, not what's really there. In the same way, when psychiatrists go out to diagnose President Trump without ever having met him or knowing him based on anything more than Twitter and occasional video clips, that's a form of insanity. Aside from all the ethics issues, the violations of the Goldwater rule, when you see what you want it to be there, when you look at an ink blot and see crazy, it's not the ink blot that's crazy. It's not Trump that's crazy. You're crazy. That's the basic issue here. A whole lot of the anger over President Trump isn't really driven by Trump. It's driven by the dysfunction of leftists who have found a perfect hate object. Think about the 2 minutes hate in 1984, whether you've read the book or seen the movie. Everybody is getting up on their feet and they're screaming. They're screaming at this figure whom the big brother has propped up to be hated. And they're venting their fury, but the fury really has nothing to do with Emmanuel Goldstein. It has nothing to do with the supposed object of their hate, whom on a certain level they couldn't care less about. It has to do with their own pent-up frustrations, their anger, their rage. Now, when these people get up every morning looking for something that Trump did to be angry about, that's not really about Trump. It's about them. When these people stood there screaming during his inauguration, doing their primal screams and their scream against Trump, and they were going to scream at the clouds, this was not really about Trump. It was about them. When you're standing in the middle of the street and screaming at the top of your lungs, it's not because Trump made you do it. Trump did not make you do that. You made you do that. It's the demons living inside your own head that are driving you crazy, that are making you behave this way. And that's the thing to understand about the left. Yes, it is a political movement, and yes, it has all sorts of intellectual premises and goals, and people at the top in many cases do actually believe in them and are committed to them. But for a lot of the rank and file, it's about their personal demons that are driving them to this. And identity politics, with its current emphasis on psychological disturbance, on I am dying, I can't even, my humanity is being destroyed every single day, on this public show of personal dysfunction, really telegraphs the craziness of the left, because the left is insane. And what the left does is it harnesses that dysfunction. It harnesses individual instability. It harnesses the sorts of people who are going to go out into the street and hit strangers or pepper spray them, and the people are going to go out in the street and scream at the sky, and it's going to tell them that this is about Trump, it's about Republicans, it's about Obamacare, it's about the Muslim travel ban, it's about this and it's about that, but in the end, it's about them. And when you have a whole bunch of shrinks who very clearly need shrinks, coming out and putting on their dog and pony show and explaining that President Trump is crazy and needs to be removed from office based on, well, nothing, because they haven't actually been able to meet with him or diagnose him, that's a very eloquent statement of just how crazy the left has become. And the left has become very crazy. The left, obviously, as I've said before, is crazy on a regular and consistent basis, but there are times when the left's insanity spikes. If you think of the left collectively, they do like to think of themselves collectively, you can think of them as a mental patient. And for mental patients, there are good times and there are bad times. Times when they run into frustration, when they don't feel validated, when their power fantasies aren't being met, when their sense of reality is being impinged upon, that's when they start behaving insanely. And the left has been about building a complete alternate reality out of their ideology, out of their academic work, out of art and culture. And this imaginary world, which has as much to do with reality as Star Trek does, is where they want to live. And some of the time they can convince themselves already there, but much of the time they're insistent, we can get to this promised land, we can make it to utopia, if only it wasn't for those people and these people and those people. And so they deal with this clash between reality and their fantasy by lashing out at the things, the sources that they perceive as being a threat to their fantasy life. And they do have a very, very rich fantasy life. I mean, if you think about everything from socialism to communism, if you think about the idea that imaginary money can just be created, that we're all going to live together as brothers under one big happy government that's going to fix everything on the right side of history, that's a wonderful fantasy. It has as much to do with reality as Lord of the Rings does, or Marvel Comics. But they're very obsessed with the idea that they can make this fantasy reality. All they have to do is, of course, kill everybody who disagrees. And it's been that way ever since the French Revolution. First, they start off with their world building. They start reforming everything and recreating everything. And then they run into the limits of their hubris. They see that you can't just make people do whatever you want because people will pursue their own interest. And that's when they start cracking down. We're seeing that happen right now live in Venezuela, where all their fantasies are running smack dab into reality. The sociologist who's Venezuela's finance minister insists that Inflation doesn't exist. Meanwhile, the country has hit 3,000% inflation. When you go to the bakery, they weigh the money on a scale. They don't count the money. They weigh the money on a scale because that's how worthless the money has become. So the left is a fantasy. And every time this fantasy runs into a wall, as it did when Trump was elected, the left begins violently lashing out at the threat to their fantasy, to their alternate reality. And you know what's a good description of somebody who lives in an imaginary world? Crazy. That's what the left is. The left lives in its imaginary world, its insane imaginary world, and then whenever there's a threat to that imaginary world, whenever anything threatens its sense of control, its ability to escape into this imaginary utopian socialist kingdom where everything can be free for everybody and nobody really has to work, it lashes out violently against that. And that's when it becomes really crazy. And that is what we're dealing with here. Now, if those psychiatrists who want to diagnose Trump had actually been ethical and been serious, they would look in the mirror and start diagnosing themselves. Instead, they invent terms like Trump anxiety disorder. Yes, that's right. Some of these folks have invented a whole anxiety disorder named after Trump. But Trump doesn't have an anxiety disorder. They do. And when you have an anxiety disorder involving Trump, it's not about Trump. It's about your anxiety disorder. And this is where the left fundamentally fails. Because when you have to escape in the fantasy world, when you have to just invent this imaginary kingdom where things always work and everybody does exactly what you think should be done, you're unable to deal with the real world. You're unable to face reality and make the serious decisions that have to be made. You're not capable of being an adult. And that's what the left is. The left are children. They're overgrown children. They used to be teenagers. Then with the millennial generation, you now have people in their 20s and even their 30s who are still basically children. And like children, they very much want to retreat into their fantasy world. They're very angry when somebody takes the gateway to the fantasy world away and says, no, this doesn't actually work this way. And when reality seems to accommodate him, when the economy goes up, when the stock market goes up, then they get even angrier and crazier. Because what really drives somebody who is mentally unstable, very crazy, is when he sees this disjunction between reality and fantasy, when he sees this incompatible clash, and he has to recognize that his reality isn't real. That's how Trump is driving the left crazy. He's forcing them to face the fact that their reality is fake. And nothing makes them crazier than that. If you found this worthwhile to listen to, you can watch other videos by other far more talented people at the Glazov Gang's YouTube channel, which you can subscribe to, and you can help support the Glazov Gang so that Jamie Glazov and his gang of talented and intrepid talkers can help bring you far more informative and enlightening shows than this. And I hope wherever you are, you're safe from global warming. Good day and good night.